2021, self-care is often depicted as looking at pictures of puppies on the internet or 100 ways to just say no listicles, but the term has origins as a form of activism. Self-care can be establishing solidarity in the face of systemic issues affecting the arts and media landscape. Join Fiona Murphy and Suzy Garcia as they discuss how to foster a real sense of community within your writing and work, as well as strategies for managing your workload while keeping your mental and physical well-being in check. Suzy Garcia is the Deputy Editor of Kill Your Darlings and a former Assistant Editor at Jed Press. As a student of the Associate Degree in Professional Writing and Editing at RMIT University, she interned at Ubud Writers and Readers Festival and Emerging Writers Festival. In 2020, she was shortlisted for the ABA Penguin Random House Australia Young Bookseller of the Year Award for her work at Mary Martin Bookshops. Fiona Murphy is a deaf poet and essayist. Her work has been published in Kill Your Darlings, Overland, Griffith Review, and The Big Issue, among other publications. In 2019, she was awarded the Overland Fair Australia Essay Prize and the Monash Undergraduate Creative Writing Prize. In 2018, she was shortlisted for the Rochelle Prize and highly commended by the Wheeler Centre Next Chapter program. Suzy and Fiona join us now for Join the Group Chat, Community and Self-Care.
Hi everyone. In spirit of reconciliation, we'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are joining us today or watching the recording later on.
We'd also like to take this moment to highlight some orgs, encouraging you to read and support the work of First Nations publications and writing. To name just a few: Ascension Mag, Indigenous X, Korean Mail, Magabala Books, National Indigenous Times, and NITV Digital.
If anyone has any access issues during the session today, please contact the session moderator via the private messenger function or put a comment down below, and we'll do our best to accommodate throughout the session. There will be captions provided to the recording in a couple of days' time, so hopefully that makes access a little bit easier as well. My name's Fiona Murphy. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a freelance writer, poet, essayist, and I've got a memoir coming out at the end of March called The Shape of Sound, which is about deafness and disability. A visual description of myself: I'm a white woman wearing glasses, I've got messy hair in a top bun and wearing a denim shirt.
And I'm Suzy Garcia. I use she and her pronouns. I'm a bookseller, creative writing and publishing student, and the deputy editor at Kill Your Darlings. Previously, I was an assistant editor at Jed Press. Today, I'm wearing a blue spotted dress and I have long brown hair tied up. So today we are talking about community and self-care and how it relates to the world of writing, editing and publishing. Before we get stuck in, let's address the theme. Today, self-care is everywhere. A multi-billion-dollar industry focused on the individual and consumerism, hashtag self-care. However, the origins of this term are intrinsically linked to community. The notion of self-care can be traced back to the ancient Greek philosophers who saw it as an ethical consideration for a sound spirit and society. The exact term emerged more recently as a medical one in the 1950s, used to help give patients more autonomy. However, self-care really entered the mainstream from the 60s onwards through the work of one group, African-American civil rights activists. They articulated self-care as a strategy to survive and thrive in the fight against racism, and this resulted in grassroots health, education, and food programs.
We'd like to acknowledge that Audre Lorde, writer, intersectional feminist, LGBTQ heroine, and civil rights campaigner, furthered this idea in the late 80s by writing, and I quote, "Caring for myself is not self-indulgence. It is self-preservation and that is an act of political warfare. The political and community context for self-care has largely been stripped away in recent times, particularly with the hashtag self-care. Today, as we talk about writing and editing, we encourage a practice that is community-focused, anti-racist, inclusive, and accessible. So in terms of what we'll be talking about today, the general framework of today's conversation, we've broken the session into 3 sections: community care, the writing life, the editing life. In each section, we'll strive to provide practical examples and tips because we believe being practical is really going to help you the most, particularly as your students seem to enter the media and arts industry, and it can be difficult to navigate. And we will also have time for Q&A at the end. So please type your questions into the chat box, and we'll leave aside about 15, 20 minutes at the end to really dive into as many questions as possible. Alrighty. So to kick us off in the first section about community, Suzy, why do you think it's important to foster a sense of community?
I think in the last year, we've all had a bit of a reckoning about how important connection with other people is. In isolation, the world seems it seems a lot smaller than it actually is. And so we don't really get a sense of how full and rich the world can be. I think networking, which, is often emphasized as a part of career building, seems kind of flimsy post-COVID. I think communities and building communities about a bigger picture and a more meaningful exchange. Personally, I wouldn't have pursued editing if not for a sense of community. The industry, the arts industry, the literary community, it seemed really closed, a small pond, and that often gets bandied about a lot. I think there have been tremendous changes, but there's still a long way to go. I also will note that I think a lot of the changes that we're seeing in terms of diversity of voices, inclusivity, have come not from the establishment, but from community demands and consumerist demands. So for me, getting involved in the journal Jed Press was a vital kind of part of entering the kind of literary community. Jed Press is a publication that provides a platform for First Nations, people of colour and cold writers. Finding people with similar passions and values made me feel like there could be a place for me. I'm a bit of a slow starter. I only recently, in the last few years, have come back to study as a mature age student, and it's only been in that context that I could really pursue these things. And I think getting involved with Jed kind of addressed some of the discouragement that I'd seen early on that just kind of put me off the industry. It seemed like the norm was pretty exploitative, closed-minded, full of power imbalances. And with Jed, was able to work towards things that I'm really passionate about, a literature that isn't so hegemonic, where writers could write about what they wanted to rather than what established gatekeepers thought was acceptable. And also, very importantly, where editors and writers are paid and paid fairly. Fee, I know community has been really important for you and in your writing and personal life as well. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, I think I could really echo a lot of what you were saying as well, Suzy. So I definitely was a slow starter with writing and publishing. And what I mean by that is I did an undergrad in physiotherapy, and I still work full-time as a physiotherapist. And when I was in uni, I went to Sydney Uni, but I didn't have any access or understanding of what studio media was. I had a friend who was a photographer, who went to a lot of music gigs doing photography and mentioned that they needed writers for gig reviews as well. So that was something that I started really haphazardly as someone who didn't have much spare money. So I just kind of put myself out there, kind of offering to do street press and gig reviews and music reviews. Reflecting on that, I was like, a deaf person writing music. How, I just didn't connect the dots at the time. I didn't really have a sense of deaf identity, and I didn't really see it as a barrier. I just was very young and very certain on my taste in music. So I'm a little bit embarrassed about writing now, because I'm like, ooh, I have some opinions. So that was my way in, was sort of through a friend in Sydney who was a photographer who introduced me to the possibilities of writing. And through that, I made some good friends, not necessarily writing friends, but through the music scene. When I moved to Melbourne in my mid to late 20s, I, at that point, was interested in writing a lot more, but I knew nobody in Melbourne besides 2 physiotherapists. And to me, it definitely seemed like a closed shop. And I had no idea about express media or any sort of journals or nothing. I knew literally nothing about the arts industry whatsoever. But what I did, I got involved with Writers Victoria, and through Writers Victoria and eventually enrolling as a mature age student in RMIT's professional writing and editing, I started to learn a little bit more about the arts industry and the media industry and what writing is. But it was really through meeting people face to face, talking to people, I realized that it is an incredibly small industry, in the best ways and in some of the worst ways, like what you were saying about gatekeeping and difficult to kind of like break in some respects. But one bit of advice that I got quite early on was that a rising tide lifts all ships. I think that's how it goes. So a lot of the friends that I made when I first started out, they're absolutely killing it now. And I think it's really important to be kind and open and generous in terms of time and attention to other writers, because you never know where anyone's going to end up. And I think it really is worthwhile to kind of enter the community with a kind heart, and also to try and find your place in it, because there can be a lot of nooks and crannies.
I also think there can be a lot of overlap. You can belong to many communities, not just one, and I'd suggest following your passion and what you're really interested in is the best way to kind of find people who are like-minded, and give you a sense of belonging. If I had some practical advice about what writers or editors should do to get involved, and I know this isn't for everyone, but I definitely think being brave and being the icebreaker in a conversation is important. I think awkwardness in the arts and kind of literary community is kind of to be expected. You know, people who big readers and might not be the biggest, easiest to like start a conversation. And I often find that like if you're the icebreaker, people are really open. And so that's definitely something that I've found. And I'd also would recommend that people go out on your own. I think sometimes that kind of small pond or clique kind of feeling means that when you'll go to an event, you just see these kind of groups of people and they all seem kind of insular, but actually most people are just kind of huddled together trying to like find a kind of connection too. And I think if there's a difference between me now and 10 years ago when I started as a bookseller and was kind of the periphery of this industry that looked very closed and is still a bit closed, I think it's now I just kind of take the initiative a bit more to get to know people and what they're about. But yeah, also that point, Fee, I think it's really important too, is to bring people with you. I said go to parties alone, but also bring people with you, bring opportunities to people, be interested in what other people are doing too. So yeah, I think that's a good way to widen that kind of small pond feeling.
Absolutely. And in terms of like events and things like that, as somebody with a disability, I find access extremely challenging to be in a room where there's a lot of background noise, a lot of people talking. So I often would literally skirt the walls of an event just to try and be able to hear people. But I find that I've found that that's actually been really beneficial in that I've slowly built a sense of community through one-to-one relationships. So getting to know the people around you, actually being interested in what they're doing is really important. But like you said, Susie, finding your place in it can be extremely difficult and hard, but extremely worthwhile. I've spent a lot of time with disabled writers because I'm thoroughly interested in disability rights and activism and disability writing. To kind of get my foothold in the wider arts community, I started a project with two other writing friends, a podcast called Literary Cannonball. And it's a topic that we're going to talk a little bit about today. Should you work for free, and sort of the exploitative natures of the industry. I started that project with Kirby Fenwick and Neve Marnie, really as a response to the lack of diversity in long-form book reviews about female authors. That was definitely a passion project that the three of us had, but it was a way of building skills through a project that was about advocacy and also about awareness building. So we were learning how to podcast as well as do media releases and pitches and production planning and scheduling, and we learned a ton of skills, but we were working for free, doing something that we felt was worthwhile and had a real place in the community as well overall. So on that topic of free labour, something that comes up particularly at the beginning of a career, and to be frank, throughout a writer and editor's career, you'll be solicited to work for free. What do you think, Susie? Should writers or editors work for free? Do you think there are any consequences or alternatives?
Just wanted to flag one thing from the previous question. I also think like social media is such an amazing way for people to get access and information. So just pop that in. I think kind of being a bit older, it's kind of a new thing for me. Like 10 years ago, it definitely wasn't as easy to get as much information or make as many connections. But back to your question about should writers and editors work for free, I have to say emphatically my answer is no. Personally, I have regretted every experience where I've worked for free except for work that was kind of for a cause. I think definitely have some valuable lessons from it, to be honest, quite bitter ones. I will note though that I have done internships via uni, and not only are they unpaid, I had to pay to do them, and they were amazing experiences. Not without issues, but there's a certain duty of care that comes through that's maintained through those programs. But again, who can afford to do them? Who is able to access them? And that's definitely something that it took until I went back to uni as a mature age student to be able to afford to do, because like you was working full-time or nearly close to full-time and was able to manage them both. I do want to touch the point about, especially because there's students watching this who are looking to establish careers in this industry, I think there is a culture of underpaid work, unpaid overtime. So even when you have a paying job, there is all this unpaid work involved and can be maintained. And I think it's important that that culture starts to change. As far as I can see, talking to people from the industry, it's like it's the norm, but people aren't happy with it. And I think it's only until that's addressed, and sometimes that addressing is just saying no, so it's not perpetuated. It's going to continue. Last year we saw Penguin Random House, the employees get together for collective bargaining, and seeing those kinds of things and the ramifications and positive ones are really amazing. And it's not just about, workers, like there's a community element to that. It takes people working together to get that done. Fee, did you have any input about, like you mentioned the podcast, but I think especially for people that are starting out, like I would like to create a body of work. And I think DIY is so important, knowing that you don't have to rely on someone else to, especially with so many different platforms that are available, you can do it yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one key of advice that has really helped me figure out how to say yes and no to opportunities and whether I should start something or just let that idea stick to one side was being told that I should treat writing professionally. So up until that point, I was really making it a big part of my identity, being a reader and a writer. So the boundaries between personal and paid work were super blurred, and I was really excited to take on any opportunity, even if it wasn't paid. And like yourself, I look back on those instances and I can see the power imbalance now of working for free in those situations was not beneficial for both parties, and they weren't necessarily great editing and writing experiences where I had the opportunity to be guided through a healthy editing experience. I'll just turn my light on. It's probably better. So I think what really helped is that advice of treating writing and editing like your profession. So you should be treated like a professional. You should be treated with respect, and you should be able to ask for clear and accurate communication from, say, if you're being edited by someone. So understanding what the timelines are, understanding what the expectations are, and all the things that come with a professional working relationship. But just having that framed in my head as, yes, I love writing, I really enjoy it, but it's also labor that I'm putting in and it's taking time away from many other things that I like to do in my life. So if I was doing any free labor, which I still do, it's for a cause and a sense of activism and contribution and responsibility. So I wouldn't do it for a large faceless corporation where they're just going to earn money out of me, but I have a sense of responsibility to disability activism. So in some instances, I may contribute to something where I'm not getting paid award rates, which I've justified in my own personal life as that being important to me. But I think it is hard starting out to understand where your boundaries are because you're still learning the industry, learning what is and isn't appropriate behaviour. Yeah, so it is a tricky and ever evolving sort of, I think, conversation that's worth having not only with yourself, but with your friends and peers. And I think that's a super strong part of being actively involved as a member of a larger ecosystem is having access to information and giving that information to other people too, because you can be a gatekeeper yourself. And I don't think that's helpful. So being professional in your conduct and being kind-hearted, I think are really important attributes to have in any aspect of your life.
I think that element of transparency, which when you mentioned about sharing information, like seeing those docs come up where people are sharing wages and sharing insights is so important. And I think that's really helping drive some change because otherwise people just don't know. They don't know what their colleagues are earning, what's the norm, what's expected. So I think that's super important. And also say to anyone out there that wants to start a publication and can't afford to pay writers but wants to commission writers is really important that you are super transparent. So many times on social media we see people saying we'd really love, like, we're open for submissions, and then down in the thread someone's like, actually, what's the pay for this? And it really shouldn't be something, a side note. It should be at the fore and very clear, or don't do it at all. In fact, I kind of lead towards don't asking people to do free labor. So I guess
just touching on that with I think something that I think self-care, a key word that comes a part of that is responsibility. Like, you do have responsibility for the care of yourself in terms of checking in as much as you can, and there are kind of systemic factors that would influence your well-being. but I think part of that is a responsibility to other people's self-care as well. Not that you're beholden to them, but in terms of acknowledging the different situations other people are in. And writers don't make a lot of money. So in terms of if you do start a project and a publication and you're not able to pay people, that's not really providing a level of self-care and responsibility to other up-and-coming writers or writers in general.
Mm-hmm. So on that note, what do you think, Bea, that we can do to make the literary community more inclusive and also accessible?
I think part of that comes, again, coming back to that sense of responsibility and kindness in terms of treating other people like people. It isn't a faceless industry. There are people behind every single book, every single publication, every single article. There are so many people involved. It is a people industry after all. In terms of, I'll focus my answer specifically towards disability, and then I'll be really keen to hear your thoughts as well, Susie, to that question. In terms of disability, as editors and as writers, there's increasingly words such as, or concepts such as own voices, which is brought up a lot. And often it's kind of thrown around the place without people actually understanding what it is and why it's important. Basically, I think Alexander Chee, the Korean-American essayist and fiction writer, brings up the distinction really nicely. In terms of every single piece of writing, it's really useful to think about what the point of view is and what the point of telling is. So if you're a writer about to do a piece of work, it's really great if you ask yourself, what is the point of telling? Why am I the one to tell this story? Do I have a specific unique angle? Do I have something to contribute to a conversation? Do I have any insight and knowledge that is of some level of authority or insight into it? Or is there someone better placed to tell this story? So I often ask myself that question if an opportunity comes up. I wonder, am I well placed to do that, to make the most of that opportunity, or is someone in a better position to contribute something more meaningfully? So I think that's, again, part of that idea that we as individuals can be gatekeepers, just as organizations and corporations can be gatekeepers too, particularly as you go through your career and as you acquire experience, knowledge, and power to publish or not publish things, asking yourself that key question, what's the point of telling of this particular piece? In terms, coming back to disability, best practice for access is always evolving, particularly as technology changes. Having just a basic awareness that things change all the time is going to give you the step ahead of other professionals, because if you think there is a set list of things that you must do to tick every box, that's a really dangerous position to be in, and it's quite closed-minded. But coming from the position of asking questions of, is this best practice? Is there anything we can do better? At the beginning of every meeting that you have, making it standard practice to ask, does anyone have any access requirements? And not assuming whether somebody does or doesn't have a disability is super, super important, because 90% of disabilities are invisible. So it's not up to you to make a judgment call of whether everyone in the room can easily access information. It's really important. Also, in terms of on social media and things like that, there are just really great ways of improving accessibility, such as providing captions for videos, using alt text for images or image descriptions where alt text isn't available, gift descriptions is a big one that often doesn't happen. Avoiding multiple fonts is really important, particularly in tweets, because screen readers will announce what the change of font is before the word, so it can make it quite a jumbled experience for people who use screen readers. Avoiding all caps. So it's a really popular mode of announcing book titles at the moment, particularly on social media. And a screen reader will denote that it's a capital letter before each letter when it reads out the text. So again, that creates a really jarring, inaccessible experience. These are all things that, again, like I said, best practice changes with technology. In terms of access, it's about being aware and open to change. It's also knowing that you don't have all the answers, particularly around language and how people choose to identify. So it isn't a rude question to plainly ask, do you have a preference of how you wish to be identified? That's actually a really welcomed question in a professional context. Without asking, why do you identify like that? That is extremely rude. Do not ask that.
Yeah, I think that point about own voices, kind of a red flag to me is to ask the question, is the person who's talking about themselves, or are they talking about someone else? I think when that kind of feeling comes up, that's when maybe there is room for improvement and for something to be addressed. I mean, even with today's event, the more I read about self-care, the more I kind of felt that Black voices were probably more vital to this conversation. And I think the kind of thoughts I was having around that, I think the word inclusion is a really interesting one, because I think it denotes that someone's doing the including. And I think for all of us who are kind of given opportunities and exploring things, representation isn't about tokenism or anything like that. It's really about truth and getting the best perspective on something. And that really comes down to representation on all levels as well. That's how the best decisions are made, not just in the contributors, not just in one area. It has to be kind of across the board. And no person is alike either. So the more people and the more different perspectives you get, the better the community value is, I think.
I absolutely agree. In terms of kind of a cornerstone saying that comes up a lot in disability conversations is nothing about us without us. And I think that's a really useful thing if you're considering writing a piece about disability and you haven't spoken to someone who is disabled. Maybe that's a process that you could question within yourself, as well as broader representation of class, race, gender, sexuality, because we all have biases that we need to actively work against.
Yeah, I think addressing biases is seen with this kind of call out culture kind of element that people don't really want to address. It's this idea of public shaming where people don't really, I think it's important to address your own biases or own gaps or things like that. And it should be a part of everyone's job in the arts, especially if they are commissioning work or, pitching ideas, to consider that as well. I also wanted to mention as well, just from an editor's perspective, because there's so much emphasis on writers, generating new ideas and being original. I think there's so much content out there. There's a high chance that if you're writing about something, someone else has already been writing about it. And I think there's also the question, are you crediting the work that you are doing? Are you crediting the ideas that you are sharing? I think that's really important, and also ties in with me with own editors as well. I think that's super important with own voices. So the decision making on that happens on different levels, not just one. Yeah. So guess to the next question. Fee, how do you cope with rejection then when you're pitching?
Yeah, so I think this is something that unfortunately with writing that it comes up, but also with editing, like going for editing jobs and things like that and writing. I've definitely have learned to become pragmatic with rejection, but it feels shit. It's terrible. But what I tend to do is really dorky. I have a spreadsheet that I make every year. And that's really part of understanding my own personality and behaviors, I think has really helped me with avoiding burnout, but also understanding what drives and motivates me to meet deadlines. So with this sort of big spreadsheet that I have, I put in each month of sort of different opportunities that I kind of want to attempt to submit to or kind of think about creating a piece for. And I don't submit things every single month. Like life gets in the way and things get busy. But what I tend to do is I kind of map out opportunities that I want to sort of strive towards over a long frame of time, so that it's not the night before something I need to submit, but I started say many weeks and months in advance, jotting down ideas and thoughts, and then slowly eking my way towards a final product. And that's something that works well with my personality, is that I know that I like to ruminate on ideas for long periods of time. So I've built that into my creative process of giving myself that rumination time, and I work in fragments, and I procrastinate by researching, and I get bored by things easily. So I like to have several things on the go at once that I can go hop between. So all of that work process ties into my personality traits, which could possibly be seen as negative. So that's basically a long-winded way of saying that I tend to have multiple things on the go. And sometimes I have several things on submission at once. And basically, if I get a rejection for one, often it's a relief of like, okay, that needs more time to cook away. So then I put it back in my rotation, and then I let it simmer away for a couple of months on end. And then another opportunity will inevitably come up where I can use those ideas, concepts, words, whatever, to submit it into something else. So I kind of don't see submissions as this make or break deadline, but I see it in almost like a seasonal yearly cycle of often the same opportunities for writing competitions, fellowships, and all the rest of it. They come up year after year after year. So I've kind of created this almost pragmatic, I like literally write in my spreadsheet if I am not successful, which is often the case, not successful. I write in that final column, no such luck, as if I'm trying to give some good energy to that piece of like, little duckling, you will become a big duck or a swan one day. I don't know if swans are little ducklings, who knows? Somebody will type into the comments and like be scathing about that. But yeah, I try and be really pragmatic and understand that sometimes a piece of work may need more time and several goes around before it becomes something that's solidified. What about you, Susie? How do you deal with rejection? Do you have a spreadsheet that's color-coded?
Look, I think from the editor's perspective, it's a bit different because you're often the one that's, you know, making those decisions on the other end. But I definitely think the idea that you are not putting your eggs all in the one basket is definitely a good way to manage that and also be productive, which in the last year, I have to say, it's kind of been a bit hard to be productive, very envious of your worksheets. But I think, yeah, having different things on the go and being passionate about them is really good. I think we're running a little bit out of time, almost getting to question time. So I think maybe for one of the last questions, I guess from your perspective, Fee, as a writer, what makes an editing perspective good or bad?
Definitely, in terms of an editing relationship, I do like an editor that is open and frank with the fact that they might not know a lot about a specific topic or aspect of culture or community. So, for instance, I do quite a lot of writing about deafness and disability, and I much prefer an editor to say, hey, I noticed this inconsistency with the capitalization of deaf, lowercase and uppercase. Just checking what the internal logic of this is, and do we need to add something for the reader so that they might understand? And I much prefer that than an interventionist editor who makes an assumption that it's a mistake and will do corrections without your awareness. I think it's better to have those quick, clear, frank conversations in the track changes than to intervene on a topic that you as an editor might not be up to date on or have insight into. What about you, Susie? How do you think about the writer-editor relationship? How should it be fostered so that it's fair?
I definitely think being edited and also editing other people, getting experience in that makes a world of difference. I think some pretty bad editing experience I experienced as a writer have really shaped the approach that I have to editing. I always want the writer to feel proud of the piece that's been published. I know in like a newsroom where there's like a high turnover, like tight turnaround, it may not always be possible, but I definitely think that there should be room for a dialogue between the writer and the editor. The writer is the artist, the editor, they also take the fall, a public fall. If there's an issue with a piece, a publication the editor kind of is a bit invisible in that way. And so I definitely think keeping an open dialogue is super important in that sense. Yeah.
And I
just so if because
no, you go, Susie.
Oh no, just what you were saying before about editors not just making assumptions about the choices that their writers make and leaving room for a writer to push back and explain themselves to, and taking that humbly is, I think, really important.
Yeah, and I think it kind of comes back to that. It is a small industry, and professionalism is really appreciated from all parties. So in terms of, I think we were mentioning in another conversation earlier, Susie, before this, that idea that you don't have to like everyone in the industry, and but you do have to be professional, and that includes clear communication. And from a writer's perspective, there are some pieces where I thought I was ready to write about something, but then in terms of the process of writing about something, I recognized that it wouldn't necessarily be helpful to my mental health to delve into those things. In terms of book writing, I was approached quite a number of times, quite fortuitously approached by publishers who are interested in my work. But for a long time, I wasn't ready to embark on the sort of books that they thought that I should write. So I did turn away quite a few offers until I was ready to show people the sort of work that I was interested in writing. So you do have a lot of power as an individual in that your stories are your stories. They're really precious, and you shouldn't have to sell them to the lowest bidder because they're a part of you. Yeah.
I think so often with self-care, there's a lot of like how to say no, and that emphasis on that. And I think going back to that thing about being professional, I also think you do need to stand up for yourself when you need to as well. And if there's no space for that, then there is a lack of mutual obligation or community sense in that. And I would say that there is a way to professionally withdraw work, and same from an editor's perspective. You shouldn't feel, because there's still room to move. And if there isn't, then I definitely encourage writers to address it in the way that they can. And that can be really difficult, especially when you feel like when you may not be, as well represented in the industry. Yeah. So I think we've got 15 minutes left for any questions, if you have any. See if they're
and we still
coming
have
through.
a whole bunch of things that we could talk about. Now, we've got a heap of questions. So from Pretty and Pretentious, how do you ensure you don't undersell your work as an emerging writer-editor when you're still discovering industry standards and what is acceptable and what's being taken advantage of? That's a really great one. Do you have any quick responses to that, Susie?
Oh, I think it's really difficult, actually. In terms of industry standards, I think it's important to know, especially when you're starting out and you're probably not pitching to big organizations, but smaller organizations, every single one's really different. Every editor is different in their approach. And so in terms of industry standards, it kind of is a bit hard to set what they are. I think in terms of being taken advantage of, I think that point before about investing your time and your creative energy in things that you believe in is really important, and then finding the right place for that to be and kind of reconciling the elements. Again, going back to that idea, if you're not feeling like if there's just an exploitative element that you're sensing and it just doesn't feel right, there are other platforms for you to build a folio of work. And even established writers do. I'm thinking of like Amy McQuire's Stackable, where she is publishing her own work. So I think discovering industry standards is a bit tricky. It's no easy answer. There's no uniform way that people do it. And I think even in recent times, there have been discussions about certain publications where their writers and their editors are saying, hang on, like, this has been normal for years, but it's actually not normal. We need to address this now. And it's been interesting to see some of those situations unfold.
Absolutely. To be frank, I have a full-time day job because that I tried to do freelancing full-time, and I found that I did burn out. It was too much. I found the pressure of putting pictures in constantly meant that I was having to write about things that I didn't want to devote my time and energy towards. So self-care for me is having a full-time regular wage so that I can focus on writing pieces that I can research, take my time with, and feel engaged with creatively. Because I know a lot of writers and engage with the community, I know that is a common reality for a lot of writers, is having, they're being able to preserve their mental and physical well-being by knowing that they've got a steady income. So there should be no shame whatsoever in having to juggle other income streams. It's unfortunate that the rate for freelancing is often not sustainable, and you may have to find other ways of writing to supplement that income or work outside the industry, which I do, and I feel like it feeds into my writing in a really positive way. When I was a younger writer, I was a little bit resentful that I didn't have that sort of student media sort of background and awareness, but as I've stayed in the industry for longer and longer, I realized that any sort of life experience actually really does feed in a really positive way to you as a whole person, and to your writing in general.
There is a question on here about burnout, which is something I know that we've spoken about before. Both of us, I think, have experienced burnout in our times, and partly it has to do with maintaining work to pay bills that is outside the industry or, adjacent. I personally, I don't have an easy answer for this. I actually had to take some time away from study many times, which meant that I was kind of definitely have this feeling of, I have to catch up because I've been delayed, so I think that time was important. It was really important. I think if there's one message I want to give the person who asked this question, I think there is this idea that you need to get things done in a certain time and like be super productive. I think quality is more important than quantity.
100%, particularly if you're writing about cultural and community aspects. For instance, I am so glad that I wasn't writing widely about disabilities, say, 5 to 10 years ago, because I knew hardly anything compared to what I know now. And I think if I had pieces published back then about those topics, I wouldn't stand by those ideas and values that I have now. So I think there are a lot of benefits to taking your time to slowly develop your knowledge. And also that just takes the pressure off. I definitely experienced that too when I was starting out, of like, got to achieve, got to go, da, 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 and being full of enthusiasm. Like, it was driven by a lot of enthusiasm. But I realized that my energy was suffering quite a bit from that, and to go into a period of burnout can be quick. You can overwhelm yourself. To pull yourself out of burnout is fucking slow. It is difficult to build yourself back up. Particularly, I can imagine a lot of you are already juggling a lot if you're studying and working and trying to pursue creative passions as well. It's so much. So another thing that helped me, besides viewing writing as a profession, which helped me create boundaries, another thing that also helped is viewing writing as a vocation, in terms of it's something that I want to foster over the course of my life and build the skills and craft over the course of my life, so that I look back and go, oh, sweet summer child, what did you know? You know so much more now, which is sort of taken off that sort of time frame pressure of got to do this, got to do that. There's lots of time to experience and explore.
I also think in this question of burnout, there are things that are tangible. I think, especially coming back to this theme of self-care, there's like this idea, just slap a face mask on it, have a bath, and that will solve issues of, you know, racism, ableism, and all these different mental health issues, all these different things. And it's just not true. There are bigger ways to deal. And sometimes the solutions aren't easy and aren't going to be overnight or instantaneous. And I think acknowledging that and acknowledging other people's needs is an important part of like a work practice, but an artistic practice as well, that, you know, is professional, but also is seeing the people around you for who they are as human beings as well. Yeah. I think there was a question here, Fee, that maybe you could talk about how do you choose your rate as pay as a freelancer?
So I think part of being part of an active member of the community, there's Young Australian Writers, which was set up by Kathy. It's a Facebook group. I think I got the name correct. There's going to be a resource sheet afterwards, which we'll add Young Australian Writers to. They've done some really, really great work in creating some spreadsheets of rates of pay and things like that. It is set in quite a lot of places and hasn't shifted for many years. So that's one way of finding out what's a fair rate of pay, is through those sort of collectivization of information resources. Hopefully that answers your question. In terms of specific self-care techniques as well, that's a question that's come up on the side. There we go. I would like to point out that sometimes self-care is not indulgent, easy, and feels good. In terms of self-care with disability, often, or any sort of access requirements or marginalisation, it takes a lot of courage to actually ask for access, because it still isn't an easy thing whatsoever. So often I find it quite useful to ask for access requirements, knowing that other people in the community might not feel of the same level of openness with their disabilities. So self-care for me is caring for the community in pushing for access for all, in terms of is there going to be interpreters? Is there going to be a quiet space for people who experience sensory overload? Are there ramps to enter the building? Is there going to be amplification for Q&As and that sort of thing? So self-care isn't always an indulgent or a relaxing or a fun feeling. It can actually be work as well, work of caring. And I think the word compassion is useful to know that it's practical kindness, and that sometimes comes with a little bit of a cost as well.
Yeah, I think when people advocate for themselves, there is people need to listen as well. I think if you yourself want to advocate for yourself and you find that you reach people that aren't hearing you or don't want to hear you, it sucks. So I think that kind of mutual kind of kind of, you know, you want to give back to the community what you also expect, and I think that's important.
I absolutely agree. And kind of just on that as well is that as writers and editors who are probably already doing professional work, if you're in student media, that is professional work. You're already working as industry professionals. I think everyone has a sense of responsibility for lifting each other up. That may sound cheesy, but I think if we all play a part in addressing inequalities, injustices, talking frankly and openly and sharing information about rates of pay, working conditions, asking about access, asking about inclusion, questioning our biases, it all makes for a better ecosystem. And I think that's self-care as a collective. Now, any final questions? We have about 3 minutes to go. I'm sure you're all quick typers. I'm slow. That's a confession that I have. I type like this. It's terrible. So
there was one
final
question here. Yep.
You go.
No.
Last question. Where to next? What are you up to, Susie? I know that with KYD, submissions are open for...
Yeah. So get your submissions in for the 2021 New Australian Fiction Anthology. We've got the link in the resource sheet that we'll be sending out. So that's something I'm part of, happily reading submissions as we speak. And how about you, Fee? You've got some really exciting things going on.
So on Feb 2nd, Growing Up Disabled in Australia is coming out. Thoroughly recommend. 42 contributors, amazing stories covering all aspects of deafness and disability. It's a really, really great collection. There's some comics in there as well. Thoroughly recommend for any editors and writers to get your hands on that. It'll give you a lot of people to also follow as well, which I think is another piece of advice for emerging editors, is try and plug yourself into what's happening kind of across the board in terms of publishing. A key tip is don't be that editor who kind of sends out kind of pictures or submissions for those key days in the calendar, because that is not a great look if you're just approaching disabled riders for International Day of People with Disabilities or any other calendar sort of day. It should be all year round that you're seeking riders from different backgrounds to contribute. So that's something that's super important. And that resource sheet that we were talking about, we've added in a bunch of organisations that we think would be great for you to follow. That will be emailed to all the registered participants. If you aren't a registered participant, just shoot an email to Express Media and they'll flick it out to you as well. Information is power. So if we can share as much as possible, it'll build a better community.
And I guess the last reminder is that Clublications is starting at 4:30 in Google Hangouts. The link is in the video description. Thanks, everyone. I hope you got lots out of this.
Thanks, Susie.